My name is Vicky Tauli-Corpuz. I am an Igorot from the Cordillera region in the Philippines, and I am the director of TEBA, which is an Indigenous Peoples International Center for Policy Research and Education.
And you're here today talking on a discussion panel about biological diversity.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about the impacts of what's been happening to biological diversity around the world lately?
Well, first of all, the biological diversity in the world has really been increasingly diminished through the years, and 10 years after the first 10-year program of the convention, the finding is that it has deteriorated even further. So I think there's really a very bad news in terms of erosion of biodiversity.
Are there any numbers or stats you can throw out there on the reduction of biodiversity?
Well, I think the assessment of the Convention on Biological Diversity says that something like 20% or 30% of biodiversity is lost, after these 10 years. So it's really not good news at all.
And why is the biodiversity being lost?
Well, I think that first of all, the land use, there are land uses in terms of changing, shifting the use of forests into agricultural plantations or grazing grounds for cattle, of course for logging and mining has really been increasing, and the attempts to protect biodiversity has not been also increased, so that is the natural consequence of this kind of development.
And what kind of significance why should people care about biological diversity?
I think it's so important to care about biological diversity because biological diversity means the diversity not only of genetic, the genetic composition of plants or animals. It's also the biodiversity in terms of ecosystems, and in terms of course, the whole plant and the whole animal. It's not just the genetic diversity, and for us to be able to survive this ecological crisis that we are faced with, say climate change, biodiversity has to be preserved, because in the forest, for instance, if you don't have enough pollinators, that will pollinate the trees that are there in the forest, the natural forests, many of these species will die, and pollinators are being lost because the heat, the global warming has really killed some of the bees. I mean, bees, for instance, they fly over long distances to go to another part, another ecosystem, and there has been some report which shows that midway, because of the heat, many of them just fall down and die. So that's one example of how, if you don't have these pollinators, the bees who are really ensuring the diversity within this forest, then you will have a bigger chance of losing your forest. And then, of course, when there is climate change impact, like for instance, increasing heat or say, long droughts and all that, and trees, for instance, in the forest are going to die. How will you recover all those species, that are lost, that you will be able to plant it again? There's really a lot of reasons why biodiversity is so important. And of course, biodiversity means that there are ecosystem services that they provide, whether these are in medicinal plants, whether these are in terms of food security, in terms of services that are being offered, like as I said, the services of pollinators. So these are different services that come from biodiversity, and if we are not regarding this as important, then we are missing a big part of the puzzle.
And so the public should be concerned about this?
The public should be very concerned about this, because if we lose these biodiverse species as well as biodiverse ecosystems, then where else will indigenous peoples in particular get, for instance, the basic needs that they have, whether in terms of food, in terms of medicines, in terms of the biological and environmental services provided by biodiversity. I mean, the indigenous peoples are ecosystems peoples. Most of us rely on on nature, for our very survival as well as for our identity. No, and if for instance, in Canada, very well, Indigenous peoples are like have animals or fish or as their totems. No, the people say they are salmon people. And if you lose the salmon, then of course your identity is also very much affected. So those are all the integration of the issues of biodiversity, cultural diversity, as well as climate change.
How big of an issue is biodiversity compared to climate change?
Unfortunately, it's not a very big issue for the dominant populations, because I think most of the people, especially those in the urban areas, do not really see how food is being produced, and where are all these different say medicines are coming from. They don't see the direct connection, so they don't really feel that it's that important. Whereas climate change is really very crucial, because when you have long droughts, when you have long floods and strong typhoons, then you can immediately relate to it, but not biodiversity. That's the sad fact.
If there was one thing you'd want the general public to know about this issue, what would it be?
About biodiversity and climate change? Well, I think one of the things that I would like the public to know is that you cannot delink biodiversity from climate change, because climate change will impact on biodiversity. It can destroy, it can be the cause of erosion of biodiversity. But at the same time, if you lose biodiversity, then your capacity to adapt to climate change is also significantly undermined. I think that is something that the public should understand, so that they will really look at the ecosystems and nature in a more holistic fashion, and not just think about it in terms of carbon, or in terms of tigers and pandas, but also think about it in terms of people. People are very much reliant on biodiversity, and the protection of biodiversity has happened because people are consciously doing things to protect it, particularly Indigenous peoples.
Now, you've come a long way from the Philippines to come here to Cancun. What's the main reason you're coming here?
Well, many reasons. First of all, I have been I have been an Indigenous leader, for almost more than 20 years, and I used to be the chair of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and I feel that it's my responsibility to make the world aware about Indigenous people's concerns in the issues of climate change, And our concern is that first, we are the ones who are directly impacted by the adverse impacts of climate change, because as I said, we are ecosystems people. The other concern is that even the solutions being put for climate change will also have direct impacts on us, whether this is because they are now saying that there has to be renewable energy sources, and one of the renewable energy sources are biofuels, oil palm plantation, oil palm, and this is causing a lot of displacement of Indigenous peoples from my part of the world, from Indonesia, in Malaysia, even in the Philippines now. So I think the human rights dimension in terms of addressing the solutions to climate change also has to be brought into the negotiations, and that's why we are fighting very hard that the human rights approach should also be recognized when solutions for climate change are being negotiated. The other reason is because I'm part of the Philippine delegation. They have invited me to be part of the Philippine delegation, and I was assigned to be a lead negotiator on REDD+. So I have to so I'm there, and I accepted because by being there, I am protecting the language and the text that says that the rights of Indigenous peoples have to be protected, their traditional knowledge has to be reinforced, biodiversity has to be protected, and good governance has to be ensured as well as the full and effective participation of Indigenous people. So those are the language that's there now in the text as of yesterday, and I would really like to make sure that those remain in the language, and this will be the result of one of the outcomes of Cancun.
Can you tell me as briefly as possible what REDD is exactly?
REDD means reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, conservation of forest carbon stocks, enhancement of carbon stocks in forest, as well as sustainable management of forests. So this is what REDD Plus is all about. And the idea is that countries which have tropical rainforests should be given incentives to be able to make their remaining forests standing, because forests are sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, but they are also sources of greenhouse gas emissions. 17% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world today are coming from deforestation. So the REDD Plus initiative is meant to prevent, lower the level of greenhouse gases that are coming from forests because of deforestation.
There seems to be a bit of conflict between Indigenous peoples and REDD programs. Though, limiting Indigenous peoples' traditional access to the forest. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, because that's precisely why the pluses were included. Because if it's just really to stop deforestation and you don't include sustainable management of forests, for instance, then of course you will destroy. There's the risk that the traditional livelihoods of Indigenous peoples will be destroyed. But Indigenous peoples are saying that they have been sustainably managing the forest, and these kinds of practices should also be supported.
Amazing. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think the public should know?
Well, I think that that the attitude that Indigenous peoples have, in at least those whom we are working with in relation to REDD, is to engage with the process, because this REDD architecture is still being developed. And if we are out of the scene, then it will be developed without us, and it can be a threat to our rights as well as to our territories. So the option of many Indigenous peoples is to really get involved in the process to ensure that safeguards and all these issues I talked about are protected.
Well, where does your greatest amount of hope for change come from?
I think the greatest source of hope is the fact that Indigenous peoples are becoming more engaged in these processes. They are coming here to contribute their knowledge and their practices in terms of low carbon lifestyles, or low small ecological footprints. And I think that is the hope that I see, that if the dominant society can really see this as one of the solutions to climate change, maybe there's hope that we will be able to save our planet.